Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Adam Goodman, partner at Ballard Partners. Adam, thanks for coming on once again.
Great to be with you post-debate.
I know, and we are here to break down the third presidential debate. It was down in Florida on Wednesday night. First, what are your takeaways?
Well, there's certain winners and losers that are obvious from last night. I think starting on the winner's side, I think there was no breakout performance. That certainly favors the former president and the Republican Derby. I thought that the moderators in NBC did a great job of keeping it clear and focused and not full of fisticuffs. And I thought that was something different than we saw in the first two debates. Foreign policy, I think America actually got a good dose of what's underneath the decisions we all have to make about what to do about things that are happening abroad, including what we fund, how we fund, certain wars and certain engagements, our alliances, the importance of that. I do think that every shoemaker who makes 3-inch heels was a winner from the comment that Vivek had about Nikki, right? Just a winner. And I think, the city of Miami, in all the breaks, I see this as a television person, all those beautiful visuals, those drone shots at night of Miami. The Tourism Bureau in Miami must love the fact they had 2 hours to show that. So those were absolutely my takeaways. Those were the winners from last night. Certainly the loss is, I think you still have 5 contenders on stage who are still trying to make the case they're legitimate opponents, contenders to take on and maybe take out the former president. I think they're running short a calendar. The early states, Brittany, like Iowa and New Hampshire, who want some, all the drama going into those two derbies, maybe they'll have a little less drama. They certainly would be considered maybe losers in this. And I think also the current president. It was 2 hours where 5 very articulate potential commanders-in-chief were taking on the current commander-in-chief. And I think they made a pretty compelling case on several fronts, which is probably helps explain why the current president's job approval numbers, personal numbers are at near historic lows.
I think in this debate, it definitely felt more contained and the questions felt a little more specific and a little more pointed. And the topics did run the gamut, everything from foreign policy, abortion, election night on Tuesday, and everything in between. Are there any answers or responses that really surprised you, shocked you, you agreed with, anything like that?
Well, one of the things I neglected to add to the winners list, which probably is number one, the state of Israel. The nation of Israel. There was absolute 100% unshakable support on that stage for Israel and its fight against Hamas. And on top of that, one of the losers in that skirmish, if you saw it judging by what happened last night, were college administrators, college presidents, who were really being called on the carpet and asked to take a stand, an appropriate stand, as opposed to, we don't want to offend anybody, so we're going to be very careful about everything we say so no one has their feelings hurt, as opposed to, they're a terrorist group came into Israel and slaughtered innocents. Let's start there. And I think that was made very clear, Brittany, from last night's debate, that if that's the Republican point of view, that actually is a competitive point of view for the elections next year, because Democrats, who I think have been, by comparison, you might say, and universally, have been a little bit more nuanced about it. I think they're going to be called on the carpet if that's the position that the Republican Party and the standard bearer will be taking.
That was definitely a unifying moment, because there were a few moments where someone said, I agree with so-and-so on here, I disagree with you there, but they all were unequivocal in their support of Israel. I want to talk about probably one of the most contentious, if not the most contentious moment of the night, and that was with sparring partners Vivek Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley. They really got into it, especially the moment that Ramaswamy invoked Nikki Haley's adult daughter. She said, get your daughter's name out of my mouth, so to speak. It was giving back Will Smith, Oscar's moment. And then she called Vivek Ramaswamy scum straight up. Who comes out better in that moment? What do you make of that moment?
Okay, number one, pure entertainment. The one thing about live debates, they're live. So all sorts of stuff can happen that isn't pre-planned. Obviously, Vivek wanted to take on Nikki Haley last night. There was a strategy that he was going to pursue from the beginning. His attack on Nikki's daughter, which really you have to read it that way, was absolutely wrong, an unforced error. And you heard the reaction from the audience; they booed. There was, I mean, universally booed that. No one wants that a policy argument to devolve into taking on someone's family unless they deserve it. That's where Hunter Biden comes into play. That was wrong. TikTok, and of course, there's the other part of the policy part of that question. Vivek, who is, said, I don't like TikTok and it's wrong, whatever, but I'm using it because I have to. I think he's really vulnerable on that. Now, did that help Vivek? I think he comes off as a 38-year-old know-it-all who has done very little of things he says he knows. Versus Nikki Haley, who is clearly very seasoned and experienced, has been there in terms of leadership positions, not just for the state of South Carolina as governor, but obviously as ambassador to the United Nations. Great foreign policy chops. I think it was clear that she scored a lot of points on foreign policy because she simply knows the material, Brittany, better than anyone else on stage. She just knows it. On the other hand, I think when she gets into a scrum with the scum, as she called Vivek, if she gets into a scrum, that is not necessarily helping her stock either, because I think it leaves the person who is literally in the middle, Ron DeSantis, maybe looking a little bit better by just not engaging. So did this debate help Vivek? I don't think so. Did it help Nikki? Yes and no. I think yes, very much substantively. But I think the personal part of it, I think people maybe are not as overjoyed about. And yet she has, if I may, how sometimes you're frustrated, you see something happen, you say, I wish I was there advising, because there's something obvious that they're missing. The one thing that Nikki Haley should have done in that moment, in my opinion, and I'm, as a media person and a person who's been in a lot of debate sessions, I would have said to Vivek when he was coming out of his shoes at her, I would have said, that's the very thing that guys do when they try to bully women into submission on a point of view or anything, and I won't have it. If she had said something like that, I think Nikki would have picked up 10 points last night. Vivek would have been pushed back into the shadows from which he came. And that would have had a whole nother kind of read and takeaway. And maybe because of some of that kind of engagement, Nikki Haley could have really taken off. As it stands, I think no one took off last night. I think the race is pretty much coming down for number two to Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. Maybe the next debate, if it comes down to only 3 people qualifying, which includes the wild man, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's a disruptor. I mean, that's his role, right? He's just doing everything he can to throw disruption into the conversation. If it comes down to those 3, you thought you saw fireworks last night, put yourself, buckle your seatbelt, because the one to come, I think, could be even more contentious.
Definitely. And to your point about Nikki Haley, if she did have a stronger response there, maybe a zingier response, I mean, they could have put that on T-shirts, on coffee mugs. That could have been her campaign slogan moving forward. That could have been a rallying cry for GOP and perhaps independent female voters. But we talked about this last time. I want to get your opinion again now. You could call Vivek Ramaswamy a lot of things. I don't think you could necessarily call him likable in his performance last night, and perhaps the past few debates. So was there any candidate you saw up there that's particularly likable, someone you could grab a beer with? Because that's really what voters are looking for too.
Tim Scott has continued to miss his opportunity. He was one of the 5 people on stage and will be largely forgotten from last night. Because in a way, Brittany, let's say, in a way, he's like performing as he would on the Senate floor to C-SPAN. The C-SPAN cameras. He's never, I think, measured up to the presidential stage. And it's unfortunate because he's got an incredible life story. I think very little of that's come out in any of these debates about him. And then on the other side, you've got Chris Christie. And Chris Christie, again, like as I were describing Nikki, very seasoned, has been there on the front lines, has been in all sorts of leadership positions. He looked like the adult at the table. The problem he's got is he has no lane, because he is so squarely anti-Trump. Even though he dialed that back a lot last night, he just doesn't have an opportunity to see, light at the end of that proverbial tunnel. So, no one, and I think among the 5, is the one I would rush to have a beer with right now. However, I would love to get into a debate with Vivek Ramaswamy because whatever it is you put out there, he's going to try to come back at you twice as strong, even again having very little pedigree or credibility, I would argue, to argue what he's arguing.
And something that he said last night that he believes is that the Republican Party has become the party of losers. And election night on Tuesday wasn't exactly a winning night for Republicans in Kentucky, in Virginia, in Ohio when it comes to abortion. So how does that fit in here when we're talking about 2024?
Well, I think actually Vivek has a point there that, the party did not have a good 20 or 22, and 23 was at best a mixed bag. I mean, in Virginia, they actually gained a Senate seat. It's lost in all the furor of it. It was a horrible night. Republicans actually picked up a Senate seat. I think they're one back in the state Senate. They lost a few in the House. But I think this is a time when the Republican Party needs to take a good, strong, long look at itself and its branding and its imaging as it moves into 24. Because there is this sense that maybe there's something that's not quite firing on all cylinders, evidenced by the last 3 election cycles, including the one that just happened this past week.
And what do you think about abortion specifically? That was a big topic last night. It was a big topic in Ohio on Tuesday. Ohio voted to enshrine abortion protections. So where do you think Republicans are missing the mark here? Because Nikki Haley said, essentially, this is basically a losing issue for Republicans if they keep going down the path of total ban.
I think the word ban scares people. It scares people. Unless you're completely and avowedly, without exceptions, pro-life, it scares women to hear the word ban. And whether you qualify it, Brittany, as a 6-week ban, a 10-week ban, a 15-week ban, the word ban, I think, is a really hard word for pro-lifers to try to explain and address. Okay, that's number one. Number two is, look how quickly in this country our attitudes evolved on gay marriage. It wasn't long ago that former President Barack Obama, a lot of Democrats, a lot of Republicans were completely against gay marriage, and now it's an accepted fact of life. I think abortion is moving down that same front, meaning there are going to be people that are pro-life, and there are going to be people that are pro-choice. The question is, what is the proper role of government in that? I think what the Republicans were trying to say last night was that that decision belongs to the states themselves and to the people within those states. But what they really should have said, even more forcefully, is that is not a decision that any politician has the right to make on behalf of any woman, regardless of your feelings about abortion. I think that part of the message is missing in the vocabulary of the Republican Party. I think it needs to be inserted back into play, because abortion, as much as it was a decider of fate in 22 and somewhat this past Tuesday, I still think is an issue because of the constant discussion now about what states are going to do and bans or not, and banning or not banning abortion in certain limits. That's going to be still a big issue in 24. And the party itself, as much as I think Brittany, Nikki is closer to the mark of where most people are in America, pro-life or pro-choice, I still don't think anyone on stage really hit that to the satisfaction of women in the middle.
We still have 2 months till Iowa, so anything can happen, as we know. But as we've talked about, as polls indicate, this seems to be a rematch of 2020. Do you think anyone at all on that stage last night moved the needle to get into the conversation of being a really serious contender against former President Trump?
No. Did they move the needle in terms of being a potential number 2 or a presidential candidate in waiting for 2028? Yes. But no, not in terms of really gaining on the president. Obviously, we'll see, Brittany, what happens in Iowa. The latest polls, which are still, I know it sounds crazy, but 60 some days out, we're still pretty far out. But if those polls hold and the president wins double digits in Iowa and carries New Hampshire, I think effectively the contest for the nomination is over, short of the X factor, of course, which is the multiple courts of law that are in play, determining whether or not the president should even be a free man.
I do want to ask you about one other poll that came out just a few days ago, and it's a New York Times poll, and it shows President Biden getting absolutely trounced in some key swing states against former President Trump in head-to-head matchups. What do you make of this, and especially after Tuesday's election night, as well as last night's performance?
Well, it certainly shows that the current president has done a very bad job of selling whatever it is he's trying to sell. He keeps talking about Bidenomics, and Bidenomics in many of the swing states is not very popular. He talks about all of the accomplishments under his administration. There have been several things they have achieved, like infrastructure, but none of those seem to have moved the needle in the right direction. He's headed south. Historically, you look at his numbers and you say he doesn't have a bloody chance. The reason he has a chance is probably the words Donald J. Trump. If Trump is the Republican nominee, it's all bets are off, right? Even though Trump has to be emboldened that in all those swing states to be up over Biden in all the swing states, that goes against the argument Vivek Ramaswamy was trying to advance in the debate, right? That we can't win. Well, he's showing he actually can win in all the key places that determine political and presidential fate in the modern world.
I do have a question about Bidenomics because the economy continues to be a top issue for voters. The Biden administration is really pushing, no, we have a great economy. That's not what voters and the average American are saying. In Iowa, in New Jersey, in New York, in Pennsylvania, where I've talked to voters, the economy is the thing that comes up time and time again, both when I ask them pointed questions as well just in general conversations. People are talking about the grocery store, student loans, gas, things like that. Why are they pushing his name on the economy right now?
Why are the Democrats pushing Biden?
Yes, because is anyone that you've talked to happy with the economy right now, with the way their bank account looks, with the way their pocket feels? Because I haven't talked to a single person who is.
Well, I can tell you it's a real easy bottom line. Costs are going up faster than wages, generally, for too many Americans. And as long as that's happening, Brittany, people are feeling the squeeze. That's what happened in 2016, where despite mainstream media talking about how good the economy was in terms of joblessness, et cetera, they were missing the mark that people were struggling to make ends meet because they weren't able to keep up with rising prices. The same thing, I think, is in play right now. And regardless of how you talk around it, and you can't talk macro to the families of America, you got to talk about where they are day to day. And if they're making less, if they're paying more and not making enough to cover the more, they're feeling the squeeze. And that is where I think the system itself is under siege. That is where the Republican message is directed, and Donald J. Trump is directed. That is why I think he can succeed based on that. And it's not something, again, that you're going to hear from the macro economists. You're going to hear it from the people of America because they're living it.
And what do you think is the biggest issue going into 24? Do you think it will be abortion, or do you think it will be the economy?
Well, the economy is always a major issue. And so if the economy is not considered to be good, as we just talked about, big deal. It's a big deal. Abortion, I think, is going to be an issue too, simply because the idea of increasing conversations around other states and state bans at certain weak markers, that's still going to drive part of the conversation. And then there's the truly big unknown beyond the candidates themselves. We have a world that is really in turmoil right now. We have a war over in Israel with all sorts of possible ramifications. We have a seemingly endless engagement in our support for Ukraine against the incursions from Russia. And we have China. And we have China, as you heard again last night, who is arming themselves, frankly, to the teeth and positioning themselves to potentially make a move into a place called Taiwan. And if that were to emerge over the next 6 to 12 months, then all bets are off about how we're going to gauge who should be commander in chief. But as we sit now, we're looking at a rerun of Biden-Trump with a couple others maybe on the independent line, and but the determination of who's going to succeed and why they're going to succeed is why we live life, right? We don't know yet.
Yeah, barring any unknown, we are sitting here right now, as you said, with a rematch. So what are you looking for in the immediate future? The next debate was just announced. It's the beginning of December. What should we look out for between now and then?
Well, I don't think anything much is going to change other than what could happen abroad. That could change a lot of things. And of course, you've seen all the unrest in America, especially on college campuses. That could change things in terms of even the renewed focus on the importance of Israel and where people stand on that issue, right? But short of that, I think the contenders on stage last night, if you were to accept the fact with tighter restrictions, the 5 might become 3 in the next debate. That will be the next determination of fate. Again, unless one of those 3 has a truly breakout performance, and they're capable of that. Maybe other than Vivek. Vivek's capable of a lot of clickbait, but I'm not sure he has a breakout performance to be seen as a viable contender against Trump. But I think DeSantis and Haley, maybe with more of a free stage, have one last chance to make a compelling argument, not just for Iowa and New Hampshire, but a compelling argument. They have a vision that Republicans in the country could rally around just as strongly as the former president.
Adam, per usual, thank you so much for all of your insights as we look into last night's debate. I also hope you come back and break down the next one for us. Adam Goodman, thank you so much.
Great to be with you again.